1980, 4 nuns from a quiet village in Northern California vanished without a trace. Their disappearance left a deep scar on their tight-knit community, stirring decades of sorrow and unanswered questions. But nearly 3 decades later, a priest uncovered something that would finally bring the chilling truth to light. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass of St. Agnes of Mercy Catholic Church, casting colorful patterns across the wooden pews. Father Elias Morrow stood at the altar, his voice steady yet heavy with emotion as he concluded the memorial service. "May the souls of the departed, through God's mercy, rest in peace," he intoned, crossing himself. "Amen," the congregation replied as one. Looking out over the gathered faces, Father Elias saw the same expressions he had seen each year: sorrow softened by time, but never erased. The people of Eldon Hollow had gathered every June 12th for 28 years to honor the memory of 4 women who had simply disappeared: Sister Mildred Hayes, Sister Joan Keller, Sister Beatrice Namora, and Sister Terds Morrow. As the service ended, Father Elias made his way to the entrance, offering quiet gratitude to each departing guest. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Harmon," he said, holding the hands of an elderly parishioner. "I always come, Father," she replied, eyes glistening. "Sister Mildred taught my children catechism. She was so kind." Sister Mildred had been 68 at the time, a life devoted to service, cut short by something no one could explain. Sister Terds, the youngest at 23, had been more than a fellow nun. She was Father Elias's younger sister. Her disappearance had tested his beliefs more than anything else in his life. Once the last parishioner had left, Elias returned to his office. The silence of the empty church wrapped around him. He sat at his desk, its surface worn by time, and let the mask fall. He buried his face in his hands and let the grief speak. "Why, Lord?" he whispered. "I've followed your path. She followed it too. Why haven't you shown me the truth?" Tears slipped through his fingers. Every year, on this day, the carefully built walls around his heart crumbled. After a long pause, he opened the drawer of his desk and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were photos he had kept safe for decades. On top was one of Terds, taken the day she took her final vows. Her face radiated joy and certainty beneath her veil. "I was so proud of you," he said softly. "I still am." But the same thought returned, the one he had wrestled with for nearly 3 decades. If he hadn't guided her into a life of devotion, would she still be alive? Would she have chosen another path, one safer, more ordinary? He shook his head, made the sign of the cross, and whispered a prayer to silence the doubt. He reached for the next photo, the last known image of the 4 nuns. They sat together on a wooden bench in front of a small chapel deep in the Shasta Trinity National Forest. It had been taken just days before they vanished. Sister Mildred and Sister Joan sat with hands folded calmly, their faces weathered but serene. Beatrice sat beside them, her posture less formal but no less respectful. And on the edge was Terds, youthful, vibrant, her eyes bright with purpose, even in the faded print. The trip had been a spiritual retreat, 2 days of prayer and reflection before a religious feast. But the sisters had also been tasked with evaluating the chapel's condition to decide whether it should be restored or left behind. Terds, known for her attention to detail, had been asked to document the structure. Father Elias stared at the photo, as he had so many times before, calculating what might have been. If they had lived, Sister Mildred would be 96, Sister Joan, 93. Beatrice, not even 30 when she vanished, might still be somewhere, if by some miracle. But that summer, he would find something buried beneath the chapel grounds, something that would change everything, and finally reveal what truly happened to the sisters of Eldon Hollow. Beatrice would be 56 today, and Terrace, just 51, still young enough to be living full, meaningful lives. But that future had been stolen, and the ache of it never truly faded. Father Elias remembered those frantic weeks after their disappearance, the search teams, the helicopters, the dogs combing every trail of the Shasta Trinity Forest. They scoured the mountain slopes and every abandoned barn in nearby towns. But nothing turned up. No clothing, no signs of a struggle, no footprints. It was as if the 4 women had been swallowed whole by the forest. Eventually, officials settled on a theory: a bear attack. The area was home to black bears, some of which could become dangerous if startled. Perhaps the nuns had strayed too far from the trail. Perhaps they'd come upon a den. But to Father Elias, and to many who knew the sisters, that idea never felt right. Not a single shred of evidence had ever backed it up, and darker rumors had always lingered in the background, whispered suggestions that the women had broken their vows and simply run away. Father Elias had spent years pushing back against those rumors. "She would never do that," he whispered now, tracing his sister's face in the photograph. "Not without telling me." As he stared at the image, his eyes shifted to the background, the white outline of the chapel, St. Dina's, a simple wooden structure built in the 1920s to serve scattered Catholic families in the area. Its whitewashed walls and humble bell tower stood against a backdrop of towering trees. He hadn't returned there in over 20 years. The memories were too sharp, too painful, but now, on this anniversary, something was pulling at him, a quiet but persistent urge to go back, to walk where Therese had walked, to sit in the pews she had prayed in. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was nostalgia. Or maybe, just maybe, something was waiting for him there, something no one had seen before. With slow hands, Father Elias returned the photos to the box, all except the one taken outside the chapel. That one he slipped into his pocket. Then, after grabbing his rosary and Bible, he left his office and stepped into the warm light of the parking lot. He sat behind the wheel of his modest car, laid the photograph on the passenger seat, whispered a quiet prayer for guidance, and started the engine. The road to the forest wound through changing landscapes. First the quiet streets of Eldon Hollow, then farms, and finally thick pine woods that towered over the narrowing asphalt. It was a familiar drive, one he'd made countless times in the early days, when the car was filled with flyers and hope. Today, it held only silence and memory. As the highway climbed into the hills, Father Elias eased off the gas. St. Dina's had once sat just off a narrow dirt road, tucked beside a grove near the forest's edge. But when he reached the spot he thought was the turnoff, he frowned. The dirt path was gone. In its place stood a gated private road. The gate was tall, ornate, and clearly new. A bright red sign read, "No trespassing." Several smaller notices warned of security cameras and restricted access. "This can't be right," he muttered, pulling to the side of the road. He reached for the photo again, holding it up to compare the trees, the ridgeline in the background, the curve of the mountain beyond. It all matched. This was the place, but the chapel was gone. He stepped out and approached the gate on foot. Behind it, the road stretched quietly into the woods. Manicured hedges and decorative trees lined the entrance. There was no sign of the humble white chapel, no bell tower, no cross, nothing. Confused and unsettled, Father Elias took out his phone. He scrolled through old contacts until he found a name, Harold Gibbons, the former caretaker of St. Dina's. They hadn't spoken in years, but if anyone knew what had happened here, it would be him. The phone rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered. "Hello?" "Harold, it's Father Elias Morrow, from St. Agnes," he said. A pause, then a warm reply. "Father Elias, been a long time." "I hope you're well," Elias replied. "Listen, I'm standing where St. Dina's used to be, but it's not here. What happened?" Another pause, longer this time. Then Harold answered quietly, Yes, the chapel's gone. The diocese decommissioned it in '82. Sold the land to a man named Silas Redwood. He had it torn down. Father Elias felt a sudden chill, not from the air, but from something deeper. I was never told, he said slowly. No one mentioned it was sold. No one ever told me it was demolished. The line went quiet again, and in that silence, Father Elias realized, if the truth had been buried, it might not have been by time, but by design. The chapel was torn down not long after the disappearance, Harold explained. Hardly anyone came anymore after what happened with the sisters, and then the bell tower cracked, nearly hit poor Thomas Frell on the head. After that, the bishop decided it wasn't worth the upkeep. The building was just let go. Father Elias stared at the no trespassing sign with unease tightening in his chest. This man, Silas Redwood, does he still own the land? Oh yes, Harold replied. It's part of his estate now. His main house is farther in, deep into the forest. Big property. Fancy, too. I see, Father Elias said quietly. I had hoped to visit the chapel today. It's, well, you know the date. Of course, Harold said gently. Today marks 28 years, doesn't it? I'm sorry you made the trip for nothing. Would he, Elias hesitated, would Mr. Redwood be open to a visit if I explain why I'm here? Harold's tone shifted. To be honest, Father, I doubt it. The man's not exactly known for being friendly. Keeps to himself. Doesn't talk much with the locals. Disappointment settled heavily over Elias. Thank you, Harold. I appreciate the information. There was a pause. Then Harold brightened slightly. Listen, I live not 10 minutes from where you are now. When the chapel was shut down, I kept a few things. The old altar cross, some prayer books, a few keepsakes. You're welcome to stop by and see them if you'd like. That's very kind of you, Elias said sincerely. I may take you up on that. But first, I think I'll try to speak with Mr. Redwood. Well, if you're set on it, Harold said, there's a back road that loops around. It'll get you close to the property. The main gate's always locked. After noting Harold's directions, Elias ended the call and sat behind the wheel, debating his next move. Part of him felt it would be wiser, more respectful, to leave Mr. Redwood in peace. But something stronger urged him forward, a sense that the path back to the truth might start with this encounter. 20 minutes later, Father Elias was driving along a narrow, tree-lined road that bordered Redwood's land. Through breaks in the pines, he caught glimpses of perfectly manicured grounds and, eventually, a large stone building that looked more like a luxury lodge than a home. It was 3 stories high, built from timber and natural stone, with tall windows and broad balconies overlooking the forest. He pulled into a small parking area near what appeared to be a side entrance. Straightening his clerical collar, Elias stepped out and approached the house. A stone pathway led him past trimmed hedges and a still pond. The craftsmanship was impressive, and yet something about the place made his skin prickle. He knocked firmly on the heavy oak door. It opened almost at once. A tall man stood in the doorway, mid-60s, athletic build, neatly groomed silver hair. He wore upscale athletic clothes and held a dog leash in one hand. His expression shifted quickly from neutral curiosity to open irritation the moment he saw Elias's clerical collar. "Yes?" he asked, voice clipped. "Good afternoon," Elias said warmly. "Are you Mr. Silas Redwood?" The man's jaw tightened. "I am, and you're standing on private property." "I apologize for the surprise visit," Elias said gently. "My name is Father Elias Morrow from St. Agnes of Mercy in Eldon Hollow." He extended his hand in greeting, but Redwood didn't take it. "What do you want?" he asked sharply, his grip tightening on the leash. "I was hoping for a few minutes of your time," Elias replied calmly. "I visited the site where St. Dina's chapel once stood and was surprised to find it gone." If you already saw it's not there, why come to my door? Redwood snapped, his voice rising. I spoke with Harold Gibbons. He mentioned you purchased the land, so I thought, to do what? Accuse me of something? Redwood stepped forward, his posture aggressive. Elias instinctively took a step back. You think that place is sacred or something? Redwood growled. If it mattered so much, the diocese wouldn't have sold it. No, Elias said quickly, raising his hands. I don't blame you. I wasn't informed it had been demolished. The chapel had personal significance for me. Redwood's anger cooled just slightly, though the coldness in his voice remained. Well, now you know. It's gone, and I sleep better because of it. That bell drove me insane. 3 times a day. Migraines. Elias couldn't help himself. The Angelus bell is meant as a call to prayer, he said softly. It's a tradition, a reminder of divine presence. Oh, please, Redwood sneered. People can set phone reminders if they need to pray. They don't need some medieval racket shaking the trees. The tension was thick. Elias took a breath and shifted tactics. I understand your time is valuable, Mr. Redwood, and I've intruded on it. Perhaps I could return another day, at your convenience. There won't be another day, Redwood interrupted. I'm not interested in discussing a church that's been gone for decades with a priest I've never met. Now I suggest you leave, before I call the sheriff. Father Elias paused, nodded respectfully, and stepped back. Very well. Thank you for your time, Mr. Redwood. Peace be with you. Redwood's response was simple and final. He shut the door without another word. With a heavy breath, Father Elias turned and began the quiet walk back down the stone path to his car. The encounter had left him not only disappointed, but deeply unsettled. Redwood's behavior hadn't been just unfriendly. There was something more beneath it, something bordering on hostility, a kind of buried resentment that seemed pointed not just at Elias, but at what he represented. As he reached his car, Elias paused and looked back at the house. For a moment, he thought he saw movement in an upper window, just a flicker. Was someone watching him? Or was it just his imagination playing tricks under the weight of memory? He slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, torn between heading back to Eldon Hollow or stopping by Harold Gibbons' home, as the man had kindly offered. Perhaps seeing some of the chapel's preserved items would bring a small measure of peace. But as he drove away, something made him veer off course. Instead of taking the road home or toward Harold's, he found himself drifting back toward the area where St. Dina's Chapel once stood. He knew there was nothing left to see, at least not physically, but a quiet pull deep in his chest guided his hands on the wheel. The road curved, and through the trees he caught a glimpse of the old site. The chapel was long gone. In its place, neat landscaping, trimmed shrubs, a manicured emptiness. Then it happened. A low, haunting sound crackled to life from the car's radio, a faint, melodic chanting. Father Elias jerked in surprise. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Gregorian chant, the ancient tones of monastic prayer, filled the cabin. But the radio was off. He was sure of it. He had turned it off when he left Eldon Hollow. He pulled over to the roadside and stared at the dashboard in confusion. The chanting faded as suddenly as it had begun. Elias reached for the dial, turned it on, then off again. Silence. Was I hearing things? He whispered. Just my mind playing tricks? He tried to reason with himself. Maybe it was interference, or a strange electrical hiccup in the aging vehicle. But deep inside, he felt something else. A stirring, a spiritual current he hadn't felt in years. The same sense he'd sometimes experienced in prayer. A warmth in the ears, a light pressure in the chest, a clarity of awareness that couldn't be explained by logic. And then the chanting returned. Just for a moment. Faint, echoing. And this time, he knew. It wasn't imagined. It felt like a call. Almost without thinking, he made a careful U-turn and drove back toward the gate guarding Redwood's estate. Whatever this was, Memory, faith, or something beyond, he could no longer ignore it. He parked near the gate and stared at the no trespassing signs. The warnings were clear, and yet something within him had already made the decision. With his hands resting on the steering wheel, Elias whispered, "Lord, guide me. If this is foolishness, stop me. If it is truth, lead me." But the pull didn't ease. The strange sense of divine prompting lingered. Finally, he stepped out of the car. He walked slowly toward the gate, acutely aware that what he was considering, stepping onto private property, stood at odds with everything he believed in as a man of the cloth. But the chanting had awakened something in him that could not be reasoned away. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was conviction. Instead of trying to climb the gate, Elias followed the perimeter fence, hoping to catch another glimpse of the former chapel site. The fence, though ornate, ran along the rugged forest terrain, dipping and rising with the land. In some places, the ground rose closer to the fence's base. Elias closed his eyes briefly, trying to recall the old layout. If he remembered right, the bench from the famous photograph had sat just east of the chapel, near a large oak tree. He opened his eyes, scanning the land beyond the fence for anything familiar. The oak tree was gone, likely cleared during the estate's renovations, but a cluster of tall pines still stood nearby. He used them as a point of reference and kept walking. Then it happened. His foot caught on a root, and before he could react, he stumbled forward. His hands hit the metal fence, and his weight pressed against a section where the posts were embedded in uneven soil. A loud crack rang out as one of the supports gave way, and just like that, a portion of the fence buckled, creating a narrow gap. Father Elias found himself halfway through, the broken fence beneath him. "Oh, Lord," he breathed, brushing himself off. He hadn't planned this, hadn't even thought of trying to enter, but now, faced with this accidental opening, he hesitated. Was this a sign or a test? He looked back toward the road. No one was around. The air was quiet, but for the rustling of trees. He stared at the gap, then at the forest beyond, the ground where St. Dina's had once stood. "Forgive me," he whispered, and with a quiet breath and a sign of the cross, Father Elias stepped through the broken fence and into the unknown. Father Elias moved quickly but with care, making his way across the cleared space where St. Dina's chapel had once stood. The area had been transformed. Ornamental plants, clearly non-native, dotted the landscape. Their bright colors and polished arrangement felt strangely artificial against the backdrop of the untamed forest beyond. Nothing remained of the chapel. No stones, no plaques, no sign it had ever been here. That absence hit Father Elias harder than he expected. It wasn't just the building that was gone, it was the memory itself, scrubbed from the land like it had never existed. And somehow, that felt intentional. Then something caught his eye. A flash of reflected light, faint but distinct, glinting from beneath a decorative shrub. Curious, Elias stepped closer and gently parted the branches. There, embedded in the earth, was a metal grate. It looked like an old air vent, weathered, rusted, with ornate scrollwork framing the iron bars. It didn't match the rest of the modern landscaping. It felt out of place, forgotten. Elias crouched beside it. If the chapel had been torn down completely, why would something like this remain? And more importantly, what was it ventilating? He leaned in, and then he heard it. At first, he thought it might be the wind. But then the sound came again, unmistakable now. A low, melodic humming, not mechanical, human. And then, a cough. Elias felt a chill ripple through his body. The humming sounded eerily similar to the chant he'd heard on the car radio. But this wasn't radio interference or imagination. Someone was beneath the ground. "Hello?" he called gently, peering into the vent. No response. The humming continued, undisturbed. Either the person couldn't hear him or they didn't know he was there. Elias stood, his mind racing. Why would there be someone underground, here, of all places? And how deep did it go? Was it a shelter, a room, a prison? He looked around. No sign of redwood, no security cameras, no movement, just the forest. His hands trembling slightly, Elias pulled out his phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Father Elias Morrow, he said, keeping his voice low. I'm at the estate of Silas Redwood, near the old site of St. Dina's Chapel, off Route 37. I believe someone may be trapped underground. There was a pause on the other end. Did you say someone is trapped? I don't know for sure, Elias replied. But there's an old air vent in the ground, and I heard someone humming and coughing. They're definitely down there. Another pause. Sir, are you legally on the property? Elias winced. No, he admitted. I damaged a section of the fence by accident, and I crossed over. I know I'm technically trespassing, but I didn't want to leave this unreported. It seems serious. We understand, the dispatcher said. Can you describe your location in more detail? Elias gave the best description he could, near the tree line, close to where the chapel had once stood. Officers are being dispatched, the dispatcher confirmed. Please remain near your vehicle unless you feel unsafe. Thank you, Elias said, relief flooding over him. I'll wait near the main gate. Before leaving, he took one last glance at the vent. The humming had stopped, but faint sounds of movement still drifted up from below. Someone was down there. He made his way back to the broken section of fence, slipped through the gap, and returned to the roadside where his car waited. As he approached, he pulled out his phone again, this time to call Harold. Harold, it's Elias. I need to ask you something quickly. When the chapel was still standing, was there any kind of basement? A crypt? A cellar? Anything underground? Harold sounded surprised. No, Father. The building was simple. Slab foundation. No lower levels. Why? Elias explained what he had found. The vent, the sounds, the possibility that someone was beneath the property. That can't be, Harold said firmly. I cared for that chapel for 2 decades. If there was something underground, I'd have known. Then it must have been built after the chapel was demolished, Elias said quietly, which means it was built by Silas Redwood. There was a pause. That's deeply troubling, Harold said. What are you going to do? I've already called the police. They're sending someone out now. Then I'm coming too, Harold said. Give me 10 minutes. Elias thanked him, then ended the call and climbed into his car. He sat quietly, thumbing the worn beads of his rosary, whispering prayers for whoever might be beneath the soil, and for what they might discover when the ground was opened. But even as the prayers passed his lips, one thought haunted the back of his mind. Could this be connected? Could there be a link between this hidden underground space and the disappearance of the 4 nuns 28 years ago? It felt impossible, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was closer to the truth than ever before. It had been far too long for anyone to survive in hiding, and yet the fact that Father Elias had made this discovery on the exact anniversary of the sister's disappearance didn't feel like mere coincidence. That timing gnawed at him. A vehicle approaching from town snapped him out of thought. It was an old pickup, dusty, worn, and instantly familiar. Harold Gibbons, the former chapel caretaker, had arrived. The truck rolled to a stop behind Elias's car, and Harold stepped out quickly, his brow furrowed with concern. Father Elias, he called. Any sign of the police yet? Not yet, Elias replied, rising from the driver's seat. But I appreciate you coming. Harold gave a tight nod, his eyes already scanning the road, the trees, and the entrance to Redwood's land. I've been thinking about what you told me, and honestly, it doesn't add up. If Redwood built something underground, someone would have noticed. You don't dig a tunnel in solid earth without trucks and machinery. Unless it was done slowly, Elias suggested. Or maybe there was already something down there, a natural hollow or forgotten space that he expanded. Harold shook his head. Not likely. This land doesn't have caves. It's solid rock under a few feet of dirt. No voids, no mines, nothing. Before they could go further, the sound of sirens echoed through the forest. A police cruiser rounded the curve ahead, lights flashing, then slowly came to a stop in front of Elias's vehicle. The siren faded as two officers stepped out. One was older, with graying temples and calm, steady movements. The other was younger, lean and sharp-eyed, alert in a way that hinted at military training. Their badges identified them as deputies from the Shasta County Sheriff's Department. "Father Morrow?" the older officer asked, walking forward with a professional but courteous tone. "Yes," Elias replied. "Thank you for responding so quickly." He gestured beside him. "This is Harold Gibbons. He was the caretaker at St. Dina's for over 20 years. The officer nodded in acknowledgement. "Deputy Williams, this is Deputy Reynolds." He glanced between them. "Dispatch said you reported hearing something underground. Can you tell us exactly what happened?" Elias calmly walked them through everything. His unexpected discovery of the vent, the voices from below, the strange music. He made sure to mention that he had entered the property unintentionally after tripping near the fence and damaging it. Deputy Williams waved that aside with a slight motion of his hand. "We'll deal with the fence later. Right now, the priority is checking on whoever might be down there." Harold stepped in. "I maintained that chapel for 2 decades. There was never an underground room. If there's something beneath the ground now, it had to have been built after Redwood took over." Deputy Reynolds, who had been silently taking notes, looked up. "Mr. Redwood's a well-known figure in this area. If this leads where I think it does, we're entering serious territory." "I'm not making accusations," Elias said quietly. "I'm only reporting what I saw and heard, and asking for help for whoever might be down there." Williams gave a single nod. "Let's take a look." They crossed the broken section of fence and walked toward the concealed vent near the landscaping. Elias knelt beside the shrubs and gently pushed them aside. "Here," he said. Deputy Williams crouched down, inspecting the metal grate. "This isn't new. It's been here a while. Looks like something from the 1930s. The detailing, the metalwork." Deputy Reynolds stepped closer and shined his flashlight through the grate. "Hard to see. It drops, then angles off. Can't tell how far it goes." "Just listen," Elias urged. "Give it a moment." The 4 men fell silent. For a long time, there was nothing but forest noise, birds, leaves rustling, the distant hum of wind through the trees. Then, faintly, a voice, a woman's voice, humming. The melody was haunting, barely audible, but Elias recognized it instantly. "Salve Regina," Deputy Williams whispered. Harold nodded slowly. "The Marian antiphon. They used to sing that here." The sound continued, broken by a dry, rattling cough, not loud, but unmistakably human. The 2 deputies exchanged a tense glance. Reynolds rose, now visibly serious. "There's someone down there, and they don't sound well." "We need to speak with Mr. Redwood, immediately," Williams said. "At the very least, this qualifies as a welfare check." Harold shook his head, still stunned. "There was never any basement. That vent wasn't there when the chapel stood. What could possibly be underneath?" "That's what we're going to find out," Williams said, his tone shifting into firm authority. They made their way back through the gap in the fence and returned to their vehicles. The deputies led the way, and Elias and Harold followed close behind. As they approached Redwood's house, it looked more imposing than ever. Its towering stone facade, tall windows, and shadowed balconies now felt less like luxury and more like surveillance, like it had been watching them all along, and inside, answers were waiting. Answers no one had been willing to face until now. Deputy Williams instructed Father Elias and Harold to remain by their vehicles while he and Deputy Reynolds approached the house. Elias watched as the two officers made their way to the front steps, their calm but purposeful body language betraying the weight of the moment. But before they could knock, the front door remained still. Instead, movement appeared from the rear of the estate. Silas Redwood emerged from around the side, still dressed in his workout clothes, holding a leash attached to a large German shepherd. His posture stiffened immediately upon seeing Elias and Harold near the police cruiser. Whatever neutral expression he had quickly hardened into fury. "What is this?" Redwood snapped, striding up to the front steps. "Why are these men on my property again?" Deputy Williams calmly introduced himself and Deputy Reynolds, explaining the nature of the visit. "We received a report about possible sounds coming from beneath the former chapel site. We'd like to ask you a few questions about that area." Redwood's face reddened. "This is nonsense. First, this priest shows up uninvited, trespassing on my land, and now you're telling me he's making up stories that bring law enforcement to my door?" "No one's making accusations," Deputy Reynolds said, voice even. "We're following up on what appears to be a legitimate welfare concern." A voice was heard, a human voice, coming from a structure beneath your property. It sounded like the person might need medical help. "Unbelievable," Redwood spat. "There's no one here but me and my dogs. If someone was living underground, I'd know about it. What are you suggesting? That I'm hiding people in some secret bunker? You realize how absurd that sounds?" "Absurd or not, we're obligated to check," Deputy Williams replied firmly. "We're asking for permission to inspect your home and grounds, any basement, crawl space, or subsurface structures." "Absolutely not," Redwood snapped, his grip tightening on the dog's leash. The animal shifted, sensing the tension. "This is private property. You don't have a warrant." "Mr. Redwood," Deputy Reynolds said calmly but pointedly, "if someone has found their way into a forgotten section of your land, even without your knowledge, don't you want to be sure? It could be a trespasser, a squatter, someone in need of help." "I've owned this property for 25 years, Redwood replied, narrowing his eyes. "There's not a single inch of it I don't know." "Then maybe you can explain the air vent near the old chapel site," Deputy Williams said, "the one that leads to a very real underground space." For the briefest second, something flickered in Redwood's expression, a flash of recognition, a split-second falter, and Father Elias saw it, but it vanished just as quickly. "I installed a drainage system when I redid the landscaping," Redwood said flatly. "What you saw was a decorative grate over one of the pipes. It's not unusual." "A drain pipe doesn't hum hymns and cough," Deputy Williams replied dryly. Redwood turned his glare on Father Elias. This man clearly set all this up, probably brought a speaker and planted sounds to make it seem like someone's down there. "He resents that I bought church land and he's using it to harass me." "As God is my witness," Elias said, crossing himself, "I would never do such a thing. We all heard that voice, just minutes ago." Redwood scoffed. "A priest swearing on God while trespassing and spreading lies? How typical." "That's enough," Deputy Williams cut in, voice sharp. "We're requesting your voluntary cooperation. If you decline, we'll have no choice but to take further legal steps." "Then take them," Redwood snapped. "In the meantime, I want these people off my land. If they're not gone in 2 minutes, I'll press trespassing charges." Williams gave a small nod, signaling Elias and Harold to return to their vehicles. As they walked back toward the cars, the officers followed, their pace calm, controlled, and clearly not finished. Back at the cruiser, Deputy Williams turned to Elias. "Don't worry, Father. This isn't over. I'm contacting dispatch to pull property records, ownership transfers, and any prior complaints filed at this address. I also want to review the file on those missing nuns from 1980. Something's off here." Elias gave a quiet nod of thanks. I know this all sounds strange, but I truly believe someone's down there, and they need help. We believe you, Deputy Williams said firmly. What we heard can't be explained away by tricks, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. Head back to Harold's for now, Reynolds added. We'll be in touch. The drive to Harold's place was short, but heavy with silence. Both men sat in their thoughts. The voice, the vent, the flicker of emotion on Redwood's face. None of it sat right. Harold's home, nestled between tall pines, appeared quiet and modest. A cabin, weathered by time but full of warmth. Not much, Harold said as he unlocked the door, but it's home. The inside was simple but lived in. Old furniture, a stone fireplace, and a wall of photos and fishing gear. Above the hearth hung a wooden cross. It's very welcoming, Elias said sincerely. Harold moved into the kitchen, putting on water for tea. Elias sat down, still haunted by what they had witnessed. I kept a few things from the chapel after it closed, Harold called out. They're in a trunk in the spare room. I'll show you after we've had something warm. Elias nodded, but his thoughts weren't on tea or artifacts. They were still in the forest, beneath the ground, following the sound of a voice no one was supposed to hear. Then he asked quietly, Harold, why do you think the diocese really sold that land? I was never informed the chapel had been sold, Father Elias said, his voice low but heavy with restrained frustration. I served at St. Agnes during that time, and my sister was one of the missing nuns. Surely someone should have reached out. Harold returned from the kitchen, 2 steaming mugs in hand, and offered one to Elias before settling into a chair opposite him. The decision came down from the bishop's office in Sacramento, Harold said, and to be honest, I don't think it was handled right. After the disappearances, attendance dropped sharply. Then the bell tower incident. Well, that was the final blow. What happened with the tower? Elias asked, grateful for the tea warming his hands. Structural failure, Harold explained. The chapel was built back in the 1920s and never got the upkeep it needed. One Sunday in '81, a massive crack split down the bell tower. That old bell had to weigh over 300 pounds. Came crashing down right in the middle of morning prep. Nearly took out poor Thomas Frell. He was covering for me while I was recovering from a busted leg. Was anyone hurt? By some miracle, no, Harold said. But it was the last straw for the diocese. They shut the chapel down immediately, deemed it unsafe. By early '82, they decided to decommission the whole thing instead of paying for repairs. Father Elias furrowed his brow. And that's when Redwood bought it? Yep, paid in cash too, more than the land was even worth. Raised a few eyebrows, but the diocese needed money for the cathedral renovations, so they didn't ask questions. What did he do with the land once he bought it? Harold leaned back, thinking. First thing he did was demolish the chapel. Crew showed up within days. Some locals protested, thought the building should have been saved, but it was private property by then. Nothing could be done. Did you ever notice any strange construction? Something that might have hinted at building underground? Harold hesitated. Nothing obvious, but in '83, folks started reporting odd things, strange machinery noises at night. A few complained about vibrations, tremors. Tremors? Elias leaned forward. The official word was minor seismic activity, Harold said. But it was odd. It was only around Redwood's place. People wondered if he was digging something, maybe tunneling. But nothing ever came of it. A deputy checked it out. Didn't find anything suspicious. And Redwood? Well, he always had friends in the right places. The conversation shifted to lighter subjects for a time. The slow changes in Eldon Hollow, the dwindling congregation at St. Agnes, and faith amid uncertainty. For a while, the tension lifted. Then, Elias's phone rang. This is Father Morrow. Father, came Deputy Williams' voice, firm and energized. I've got an update. I just got off the phone with Judge Martinez. She's signed off on an emergency warrant, a welfare search. We have grounds for suspicion of unlawful confinement. A surge of relief moved through Elias. That's excellent news, Deputy. We'll be heading back to Redwoods within the hour. I'm advising you to stay clear. This is now part of an official operation. I understand, Elias said, though his heart ached to be there. If we find anything, Williams added, you'll be the first civilian I call. This started because of your persistence, Father. I respect that. Harold, who had overheard, insisted they should at least be allowed to observe. We don't have to interfere, but if something's uncovered, if it's spiritual in nature, we ought to be there. With some hesitation, Williams agreed. You can remain in your vehicle on the public road. Observe only. No approaching the site. Understood? They both nodded. An hour later, Father Elias and Harold were parked in view of the estate's entrance. The light had dimmed, and shadows stretched long beneath the trees. Police cruisers rolled in, joined by a forensic van and an ambulance, the presence of which sent a deep chill through Elias. Deputy Williams approached their vehicle briefly. We're heading in with the warrant. I've enabled a private body cam feed. You can watch everything from your phone, but do not leave this car. He handed Elias the link and returned to the team. Together, the officers approached Redwood's front door. On the screen, Elias and Harold watched as the door opened. Redwood's expression twisted with fury the instant he saw them, and especially when the officers presented the signed document. Though the audio was muffled, his objections were clear: threats, accusations, denials. He promised lawsuits, made calls, but it didn't stop the search. The officers moved through the house in pairs, checking each room with quiet efficiency. Redwood was kept under observation in the living room. Nearly 45 minutes passed before Deputy Williams spoke to the camera. No suspicious findings inside the house or basement, he reported. Now moving to outer structures and the forest path, they followed a gravel road that curved into the woods, narrow, quiet, canopied by old trees that filtered the fading light. Mr. Redwood has confirmed a storage shed lies ahead, Williams said aloud for the record. It sits near the former chapel site. Father Elias and Harold watched from the car in silence. Redwood was still visible on the screen, walking stiffly between the officers, restrained only by their authority and the seriousness of the moment. After 15 minutes of quiet hiking, the camera finally came into focus on a modest wooden shed tucked between the trees, small, unassuming, but nothing about it felt ordinary anymore. The shed was larger than Father Elias had expected, roughly 20 feet square, with weathered wood siding and a corrugated metal roof that gleamed faintly in the fading light. This is just a tool shed, Redwood said flatly, his tone laced with irritation. Garden tools, maintenance supplies. You're wasting your time. The officers, unfazed by his dismissiveness, began a careful search. Inside, they found dusty shelves lined with equipment, lawnmowers, shovels, old cans of paint. Cobwebs stretched across the corners, and the air was thick with a musty odor. One officer commented that it looked like the place hadn't been used in years. Then came the noise. A sharp clatter as a heavy wrench slipped from a shelf and struck the wooden floor. With a sound that wasn't quite right, it echoed. Deputy Reynolds immediately knelt and tapped the floorboards. This section sounds different, he said, then shined his flashlight across the boards. These look newer than the rest. Redwood's protest grew louder, more agitated, but the officers ignored him and began pulling up the suspicious planks. What they uncovered stopped them cold. A stone staircase descending into darkness. Mr. Redwood, Deputy Williams called, his voice firm and echoing slightly. Would you care to explain this? Redwood's face turned ashen. Gone was the bravado. He said nothing. Stay with him, Williams instructed his team. He and Reynolds prepared to descend. Switching to tactical lights, Williams narrated into his body cam feed. The stairs appeared carved straight into the bedrock, worn in the middle from years of use. At the bottom, they came to a thick wooden door, sealed with an aged iron lock. "It's locked," Reynolds reported. "Mr. Redwood," Williams called up. "We need a key." "I don't know anything about a door," Redwood shouted back. "It must have been here before I bought the land." The officers exchanged a look, skepticism written clearly on their faces. As they scanned the area, one officer noticed a hollow in the stone wall beside the stairs, hidden in shadow. Inside was an iron key, green with age but intact. "Found a key," the officer said, handing it off. With a metallic groan, the lock turned. The heavy door creaked open, revealing a narrow tunnel just wide enough for one person to walk through at a time. "We're entering a man-made tunnel," Williams said quietly, the camera shaking slightly with each step. Stone walls supported by beams, roughly 6 feet high, likely built in recent decades, though designed to look much older. The officers moved slowly through the passage, their flashlights cutting into the dark. The tunnel wound gently, then straightened, heading toward the direction of the former chapel. Minutes passed. Then, the tunnel opened into a small chamber. The camera revealed a space that was simple but lived in. A thin mattress on the floor, a small table with the remains of dried food and crude wooden furniture, a bucket in the corner. Then, from the shadows, came a frail, whispering voice. "Help! Is someone there?" Deputy Williams turned his light. In the beam, a figure appeared. A woman, elderly and pale, lying on the mattress. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken but alert. In her hands, she clutched a handmade wooden rosary. "Ma'am," Williams said gently, kneeling beside her. "I'm Deputy Williams, Shasta County Sheriff's Department. We're here to help. Can you tell me your name?" Her dry lips moved slowly. "Sister, Therese Morrow." In the vehicle outside, Father Elias gasped, hand flying to his mouth, eyes brimming. "My sister," he whispered. "My God, it's her." Harold laid a hand on his shoulder, his own face drained with shock. Back inside the chamber, the camera showed the walls, covered in religious carvings, crosses, saints, biblical scenes, all shaped from scraps of wood and stone. A single candle sat on the small table, long since burned down to the base. Etched into the far wall was a large cross, carved with care and reverence. "Sister," Williams said softly, "we're going to get you medical help right away. Is there anyone else here with you?" Her eyes drifted toward a shadowed corner of the chamber. "Beatrice, she's gone to God many years ago." The light followed her gaze. There, under a tattered blanket, were skeletal remains on a second mattress, unmistakably human. "Requesting medical team immediately," Williams said into his radio, his voice tight with urgency. "Also need forensics. We have one living victim and confirmed human remains." Outside, Father Elias couldn't wait another moment. He bolted from the car. "Please," he cried, running toward the officers at the perimeter. "That's my sister, Sister Therese. I'm Father Elias Morrow. She's been missing for 28 years. I need to see her." An officer intercepted him, but after confirming his identity over the radio, they allowed him through. "Wait here, Father," the officer said. "They'll be bringing her out soon." Elias stood in stunned silence, rosary clutched in one hand, the other pressed to his chest. He prayed silently, the moment too vast to fully comprehend. Minutes passed. Then activity surged at the shed entrance. Paramedics emerged, guiding a stretcher slowly and carefully from the passage. On it lay Sister Therese, fragile, barely visible beneath the thin blanket. But as she passed, her head turned ever so slightly. Their eyes met. And in that fleeting second, Father Elias saw her, not the frail figure on the stretcher, but the young woman who once took her vows with radiant conviction. Those eyes, they were still hers. Her eyes, once lit with youthful devotion, now carried the weight of unimaginable endurance, and though no sound escaped her lips, Father Elias could read the words she silently mouthed as she was wheeled past. God never left me. As paramedics rushed Sister Terrace toward the waiting ambulance, another team exited the shed, carrying a body bag. The sight struck Father Elias with a new wave of sorrow. He knew, without being told, that the remains were those of Sister Beatrice. Grief swelled within him, tempered only by the miracle that his sister had been found alive. Then, through the activity and motion, he caught sight of Silas Redwood. The once proud man was now being led away in handcuffs, his expression hollow and defeated. As he was escorted past Father Elias, something dark flickered behind his eyes. In a sudden burst of venom, he lunged toward the priest and spat directly on his cheek. "Proud of yourself, Father?" he hissed. The officers yanked him back, restraining him with practiced ease. Elias calmly wiped his face, his voice firm but serene. "I count it all joy to suffer, just as my Lord did." As Redwood was taken away, Elias overheard murmurs from the officers nearby. One was speaking about another set of skeletal remains discovered in a separate underground chamber. They speculated it could be Sister Joan or Mildred, one of the two elder nuns who vanished with Therese and Beatrice. The pieces of the tragedy were slowly coming together. Harold appeared at Elias's side, his voice gentle. "The ambulance is ready to leave. We should go." Elias simply nodded. His heart was too full for words. They returned to Harold's car and followed the ambulance down the winding road, sirens wailing into the dusk, carrying Sister Therese toward freedom and care after 28 years in darkness. The emergency room lights were harsh against the night sky, casting long shadows across the ambulance bay. Paramedics wheeled Sister Therese through the sliding doors as Elias and Harold pulled in behind them. They rushed to follow, but were intercepted at the entrance by a nurse. "I'm sorry, Father," she said gently but firmly. "The medical team needs space. She's in extremely fragile condition." "I understand," Elias said, though every part of him longed to be beside her. "But I'm her only living family. She's been missing since 1980. I believed she was dead until today." The nurse's face softened. "We'll do everything we can. There's a waiting room just down the hall. I promise. Someone will update you as soon as possible." Harold guided him toward the sterile space. Inside, they sat in silence. No words between them, just the weight of the day pressing down. The silence stretched until Harold finally spoke. "It's a miracle, Father, after all these years, to find her alive." Elias nodded slowly. "A miracle, yes, though I can't imagine what she endured." "She had her faith," Harold replied. "Sometimes that's enough." The thought comforted Elias. He recalled the carvings lining the walls of that underground chamber, crosses, saints, sacred images, all fashioned with care, all proof that, even in captivity, Therese had never let go of her faith. "I should call St. Agnes," he said suddenly. "They should know she's been found." But as he reached for his phone, it rang in his hand. Deputy Williams. "Deputy," Elias answered, his voice catching. "I'm at the hospital. She's being treated now." "That's good to hear, Father," Williams said. His voice was brisk, serious. "I wanted to update you. Redwood is in custody. He's refusing to speak without an attorney. But we found something, a journal, detailed entries going back decades." Elias sat upright. "What kind of entries?" "Deeply troubling ones," Williams said. He kept personal records, writings filled with hatred, mostly directed at the church, and religious women in particular. The entries begin in the late 70s. There's clear obsession with the nuns from St. Dina's. "But why?" Elias asked, shaken. "What could drive someone to this?" There was a pause. "It's personal for him. Williams explained. According to the journal, his mother left him when he was a baby. She later became a nun. He never knew her, never even saw her. He was raised by a grandmother, devout Catholic, who, from the sound of it, abused him under the guise of discipline. He grew up resenting women who chose faith over family, especially nuns. Elias closed his eyes. A heavy sadness filled him. So much pain, twisted into hatred. "There's more," Williams continued, his voice growing somber. The journal confirms that the two older sisters, Mildred and Joan, died within the first year. Their health deteriorated quickly under the conditions. It's not surprising, considering their age and what they endured. "May their souls rest in peace," Elias whispered, making the sign of the cross. Sister Beatrice survived longer than the others, Deputy Williams continued. According to Redwood's journal, she lived nearly a decade after the abduction, until the early 1990s. He wrote that she died from what appeared to be an untreated respiratory infection. Elias closed his eyes, struggling to contain a surge of grief. "And my sister?" he asked softly. "How did Therese survive when the others didn't?" There was a pause on the line. "Father," Williams said carefully, "some parts of Redwood's journal are deeply disturbing. He seems to have developed an unhealthy obsession with Sister Therese. After Sister Beatrice died, he began keeping Therese isolated." Elias felt the air thin around him. "There are photographs," the deputy continued, his tone even but strained. "They indicate he subjected her to degrading treatment, repeatedly. He was physically and emotionally abusive for years." A surge of nausea rose in Elias's throat. "Dear God," he whispered. "I'm sorry, Father. I wish I could say otherwise, but the evidence is clear. The fact that she retained any sense of self, let alone her faith, is beyond remarkable." "She didn't sin," Elias said suddenly, his voice steady and firm, both a declaration and a defense. "She was a victim. Whatever happened to her, none of it was her fault. The sin belongs entirely to her captor." "Absolutely," Williams said solemnly. "There's no question about that." Harold, sitting beside him in the hospital waiting room, placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. His silent support said more than words ever could. "There's one more thing," Williams continued. "Redwood documented how he managed to abduct 4 women without leaving a trace. It was planned down to the smallest detail." Elias listened intently as Williams described what the original investigation had never uncovered. Redwood spent months watching the nuns at St. Dina's, learning their routines. He knew the dates of their spiritual retreat. When he saw they'd be isolated, he made his move. How did he take them without anyone hearing? Without evidence? Elias asked, the old frustration of those early days returning. In his own words, Williams said, he posed as a helpful neighbor, brought tea and small gifts to the chapel. The tea was laced with sedatives. The older sisters, Mildred and Joan, drank first. When they became drowsy, the younger nuns helped them to bed. That's when Redwood struck. He overpowered them, one by one. Your sister fought back. She almost made it out the front door before he knocked her unconscious. Elias pressed his fingers to his forehead, imagining the chaos, the fear, the courage his sister had shown in those terrible moments. He removed them through a back corridor that used to serve the old chapel staff, loaded them into his vehicle under cover of night. Then he cleaned everything, burned bedding, discarded letters, scrubbed the floors with lye. By the time anyone came looking, there was nothing to find. And the investigation? Elias asked bitterly. Why did it go cold so quickly? Back in 1980, rural law enforcement didn't have the tools we have now, Williams explained. No surveillance networks. Forensics were limited. Records were often incomplete, and Redwood had no criminal record. He was wealthy, respected, donated to local charities. No one suspected him. He bought the chapel through a shell company, Elias said quietly, the puzzle now falling into place. Tore it down to erase the crime scene. Exactly. After that, he built the underground chambers, connected them to the shed through that tunnel. That's what people were hearing in '83, the machinery, the tremors. No one realized it was him. Why didn't anyone stop it? Harold suddenly asked, his voice tight with frustration. Elias repeated the question. There was a sigh on the other end of the line. Because, according to the journal, Redwood bribed local officials, just enough to keep inspections from happening. He made sure complaints were dismissed as noise violations or minor disturbances. We're launching a full investigation into that now. Before Elias could respond, a woman in blue scrubs approached, clipboard in hand. Father Morrow? He stood immediately. Yes, I'm her brother. How is Sister Therese? The woman sat beside them. She was in her early 40s, her eyes kind but serious. I'm Dr. Chen. Your sister is stable, but I want to be completely honest with you. Her condition is fragile. She's extremely malnourished. Her muscles have atrophied significantly. She has severe vitamin D deficiency, likely from being deprived of sunlight for decades. We also found evidence of multiple healed fractures that were never treated properly. Elias absorbed each word like a blow to the heart. Our most immediate concern, Dr. Chen continued gently, is how to safely reintroduce her to normal environmental conditions. After spending so many years underground, her body will need to adjust very gradually. Too much light, sound, or stimulation could cause complications. Elias nodded slowly, his throat thick with emotion. I understand. Thank you for taking care of her. You'll be able to see her soon, the doctor added. But right now, she's resting. The first 24 hours are critical. Elias sat back in his chair, hands folded, silently praying. And for the first time in nearly 3 decades, he knew exactly who he was praying for. Her immune system is extremely fragile, Dr. Chen explained gently. We have to be vigilant about infection risks. Even standard light levels are likely to be painful for her eyes after so many years underground. Father Elias nodded, his voice barely audible. When can I see her? She's being admitted to the ICU right now, Dr. Chen said. We have to take extreme precautions. Anyone entering will need full protective gear, mask, gown, gloves, to avoid exposing her to even a minor pathogen. But even with those measures, I can only permit a brief visit. I understand, Elias replied. The words were difficult to say, but necessary. I've waited 28 years. I can wait a little longer to keep her safe. Dr. Chen offered a gentle smile. She asked for you, you know. One of the first things she said was your name. She said she knew you'd find her. Elias's breath caught. Tears filled his eyes as the weight of her words sank in. She never lost faith, he whispered. Apparently not, the doctor said softly. The paramedics said she was holding onto a rosary, looked handmade, crafted from scraps of wood and bits of fabric. She wouldn't let go, not even during treatment. Elias gave a small, tearful smile. That sounds like her. Her faith was always stronger than mine, even when we were children. You'll be able to see her in about an hour, Dr. Chen said, standing. A nurse will come get you when she's ready. As she stepped away, Elias turned to Harold. Would you mind if I spent some time in the chapel? I need to pray. Of course, Harold said. I'll stay here in case there's any update. Elias made his way to the hospital's small interfaith chapel, a quiet, modest space designed for any soul in need of reflection. Finding it empty, he knelt before the simple altar and lowered his head. Thank you, Lord, he whispered, his voice trembling, for this miracle, for sparing my sister, for guiding us here after all these years. He prayed in silence for a long time. Joy, grief, anger, gratitude, every emotion flooded through him. Questions remained. Questions about suffering, about timing, about why such evil had been allowed to endure. But slowly, peace began to settle over him. Some answers would never come, but the miracle had. His sister had been found, and her faith had endured. When he returned to the waiting room, Harold was speaking quietly with a nurse who had come to escort Elias to the ICU. After suiting up in protective gear, Elias followed her through a maze of corridors until they reached a private room. Inside, Sister Terrace lay surrounded by machines and monitors. She looked nothing like the vibrant young woman who had disappeared nearly 3 decades earlier. Her face was thin, her skin pale from years without sunlight. But when her eyes opened and found his, he saw it. That unmistakable light. The same quiet strength, the same sacred flame. "Elias," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "You found me." "Tess," he said, his voice cracking behind the mask, tears running freely down his cheeks. He gently took her fragile hand in his gloved one. "I never stopped looking, never stopped praying." A faint smile played on her lips. "I knew you wouldn't. I told Beatrice. God would send you someday." "I'm so sorry," Elias choked. "I'm sorry it took so long." She shook her head gently. God's timing. Perfect. Always perfect. The nurse touched Elias's shoulder, reminding him that time was up. He nodded. "I'll be right outside," he promised, his voice firm. "I won't leave. We'll talk more soon. There's so much to say." As he stood to leave, her voice came again, soft but insistent. "Tell me one thing." He paused. "The church, is it still strong?" Elias smiled behind the mask. "The gates of hell have not prevailed against it," he said, quoting Christ's words with quiet conviction. "Rest now, sister. God is with you, and so am I." As he stepped out of the room, Father Elias felt a profound awe. Her first question wasn't about herself, not about her suffering or the time lost. It was about the church, about her vocation, about faith. And in that moment, he understood something deeper, that the light she had carried inside her through 28 years of darkness had never once flickered. It was still shining, and now it was leading her home.